I'm Christoph von Tomme, and welcome to the API Resilience Podcast. If you've ever wondered what it really is we do when we do APIs, and if you've wondered how APIs change organizations, our communities, and our society, look no further. This is the podcast you've been searching for.
Welcome to the API Resilience Podcast. I'm very honored and excited to have Ken Lane as a return guest today to talk a bit about what he's been up to. Because for those that are not, I assume that all my listeners will already know Ken Lane, but in case you don't know him yet, we'll go through that in a little bit, but he's got a very long history with APIs and as the API Evangelist. And recently he started a company that is focusing on an interesting area that's close to my heart. And that's the conversation that I'm very much looking forward to chat a little bit about Naftiko. But with that, welcome, Ken. Welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here. Always enjoy talking with you about what's going on in the space and where things are headed. And to the people, listeners, I don't know Ken Lane. So if you have any insights, please share them with me. I'm learning every day, all the time. And I've been doing API Evangelist for 15 years, and I still don't know APIs as well as I should, and I still am just as insecure about everything going on with AI right now as y'all are. So here we are.
And I think because of that, you're actually the best person to talk about all of this. Yes. So, Ken, you've been up to something new. You did a launch of your new startup. Can you maybe give us a short overview of what you've been up to?
Sure. So, in order to give the story, tell the story of Naftiko, I need to back up just a little bit and tell a little bit of my journey for the last few years, starting with API Evangelist in 2010, where I study the technology, business, and politics of APIs. And I rode that for about 9 years. And so very much the full lifecycle API management, to quote our dear friends at Gartner, that whole wave of things, 3-scale, Apogee, Mastery, which is very much a producer side of the API conversation, meaning people who produce APIs and what do they need throughout that life cycle. And so I very much lived that realm for a number of years. And then in 2019, I had a daughter need to go to university and needed some health insurance. And it's a very US thing. So I got a job, and a proper job that paid you money. And I joined Postman, which is an API client. And it was 40 people at the time, 45. And then worked there for 4 years, helped grow it into a pretty large company. But that was a consumer side, meaning you're using a client and you're accessing APIs and you're trying to test, automate them, document them, work with a lot of support groups, people publishing docs, tech writers, portal people, center of excellence. So it's all that. It's all the people concerned with the consumer side of the experience. And it showed me a different side than the IT purchasers who are producing APIs and often being sold to. And when I was there, I had a podcast called Breaking Changes, and we talked very much about both sides of it. And I talked to people and said, the number one thing is we need things to be more like products with these feedback loops between these two groups. That's like the biggest disconnect or breakage problem, things that's costing us the most money, slowing us down, introducing risk, is we don't have feedback loops between these two groups. And then number two was we don't have any governance. And so I poked my head up, who's hiring for API governance and products? And Bloomberg had an ad for a job. And so I came here to New York City to work for Bloomberg and stand up an API governance program that was governing their REST, GraphQL, Kafka, event-driven APIs. And then, but with a strong asterisk on it, align that with business groups. And so, this long convoluted story gets to when I left Bloomberg, I ran into Jerome, who I knew from the API days, the API management kind of days. He had a company called Restlet that I used to work with and consult with him. It was an API producer platform. And he shared this idea of Naftiko as a consumer play. It's It's about the APIs it's about governing and managing the APIs that you're consuming. They could be internal, or they most likely are Salesforce, Notion, Stripe, Twilio, those APIs. And so we started Naftiko, and we're about to release the alpha product here in a week. And what it started as and what it is, it's evolved. We're a startup, and we've been talking to customers and design partners. And so what it is right now that I just played with and used is, it is a framework. It's in Java, but it runs in a Docker container, and you can just download it, fire it up in Docker, and begin using it. And how you configure it is using a YAML configuration that we call a capability. And that capability allows you to define some metadata, but then right now it'll define what you want to consume and what you want to produce in a kind of reverse sense than traditionally. Is if I want to consume, say I want to consume an API that's poorly designed, and I want to produce well-defined API on the other side, I can do that with this capability. So I want to be capable of transforming this existing legacy older API that I don't have a lot of control over. I really can't change their behavior. I want to produce a well-designed and well-documented representation of that. Now, I may also want to do that across many APIs, and you can do that. You can do it one or many and create this new API. So that's framed in a capability. You want to be capable of doing something, and then you put that in a Docker container and you hit start, and you're now capable of doing that. Now, Naftiko means Navy in Greek. And so the idea is you can fire up many of those containers. That becomes your fleet, your Navy, and you're capable of doing whatever you need to do, from ferrying vehicles across the channel to oil tankers out of the Middle East. Maybe I shouldn't go, but whatever you need to be capable of doing, you're capable of not just individually being able to do it, but as a fleet, many different APIs, and moving in that direction you want to go. Now, that API you produce, it could be a REST, it could be an MCP, or it could be agent skills. So that's an important distinction, is I want to consume an existing, but I want to transform it and produce a new REST HTTP API, a new MCP, or a new set of agent skills, or D, all the above. I need that spectrum for all of it. So that's what I'm up to.
That also means that you could actually, Naftiko is an answer to the fast changing AI world, because you, instead of, should I make an MCP server, or maybe I should make a skill, or am I going to do a gem in the Google ecosystem, or which of these should I be doing right now? And the answer is changing so fast, and it's so hard to keep track of. I'm daily in this stuff, and I'm sure you're too. And with being so busy with all of it, I'm still feeling overwhelmed. So I can only imagine for people that are not, whose primary job is not dealing with these changes, but applying it into their business, that it's impossible to keep up. But then that means that Naftiko could actually be an answer to that, because you can change paradigms. So you could start with making a Naftiko, an MCP Naftiko, and then turning it around into a skill or whatever comes next. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, that rapid iteration, rapid transformation, but that's very much what we're trying to focus on from a go-to-market kind of messaging, is not too much on the hype train.
Yeah.
Paying attention to your legacy, and using that word legacy in a positive sense, not a negative sense. We have a legacy we want to leave. All of this we've already invested in. It's already exists. Yes, there's probably problems there and challenges, but it exists, and we need to kind of embrace it and maximize that. So how do you transform that into what you want to be capable of, or need to, this week or this month or this quarter or this year? And acknowledge that, yeah, things are rapidly changing, and what should we be doing? And I'm really getting away from, there's a right way. It's the right way, or just API design in general, which MCP and agent skills are API design to me. It's spec-driven, it's design. Is the right way is negotiated in any given moment. in any given market situation amongst the stakeholders that matter. And that may be true this quarter and it may not be true next quarter, but it's not also a given or a constant or inevitable, as you hear a lot, is I still am talking to people who, yes, EDI is something they need to address, but it's not necessarily get rid of it. It's just they have other projects they need off to the side. They don't want to completely modernize their SOAP or their EDI. They don't want to get rid of that because it's working and it's functional in existing systems. But they need to do some other applications and they need an MCP server off of a slice of it. So how do you adapt rapidly to the moment and negotiate what's needed?
So it's kind of like a generalized interface management and adaptive interface management.
Aligned with business goals and business outcomes. Yeah.
And that is the crux, because it's like flipping the API management world on its head, where it's always been about, are you one of the cool kids who's adapting the latest, newest, greatest, to, okay, so what are the capabilities you have as an organization? And then we'll talk about how we're going to actually expose it. That is what I think you're doing, right?
Yeah. I mean, what do we have? What do we need to be doing? And what should we do to kind of meet that? Not just, hey, what should we be doing? Oh, it's the cool thing, let's do it. Yeah. It's actually taking inventory of what's available to us. What tools do we have available? It's kind of, I'm learning to love MCP in this sense. That MCP protocol has tools, resources, and prompts. 3 kind of interesting buckets for how you organize. And tools are often files, databases, APIs. Resources are docs and other resources that support that. And then prompts are the AI. But I would add other, who are the people. And so when you're creating a capability, and MCP is just one potential of that stack, you have the ability to govern or guide, as I would say, that certain decisions are made. Why are we doing this? What existing resources we have? Let's take inventory of our existing tools and our existing resources. Hey, what prompts are working? What are not? Now let's also get the right people at the table, not just engineers. Let's get the data people, let's get the architects, let's get the product people, let's get sales and support there. If it's that level of a capability, if it's a product level capability, if it's not, let's just get the right people. But then let's take all of that and come to some consensus on what do we need to be capable of doing, and that grounding in what exists already and what the business outcomes are is a great way to go, well, we're not quite ready for skills. That MCP is going to help us, or API is just fine. Event-driven webhooks is just fine. Maybe we don't need Kafka. We can just do webhooks. So that level setting of what technology is through the lens of a capability and having the right people and business outcomes, that's pretty key.
Yeah. And this was thinking, like you were writing about this somewhere in July, you did an update about your definition of capabilities. That's how we started talking about this again, right? Mm-hmm. There was elegant in there, because you're not alone with this perspective of capabilities. So then I did a post about it myself, because we've also been busy with capabilities as productized affordances, but on the outside, because I think you're focusing primarily on infrastructure inside of enterprise organizations and
primarily large enterprises too. So what is your definition of a capability?
So my definition is it's a productized affordance. So affordances is this social technical concept where it's like related to a feature of a product of or an organization. But it's not a feature, because it's not necessarily something that has been built on purpose. It might be something that has been discovered, like an existing interface where you discover like, oh, actually we can use this for this other thing that is also a really important thing that we need. And as such, affordances are not necessarily managed, because often they're just things that people do because they're familiar with the tool and they're using it in some weird way to achieve a certain outcome. But then when you productize this, when you analyze what people are doing with your products, and then you document that and bring it to the outside world and describe it now as, this is one of the things that you can do with us, then it becomes this capability that you can then start sharing. AI can start using it. It starts forming a connection between different worlds and different domain languages, and people can learn it as a concept that they can then start using going forward. What is your definition for a capability?
It's rapidly evolving week to week, month to month. I would say I don't have any strongly held beliefs at this. I would say my strongest held belief is that it's aligned with business outcomes. Mm-hmm. I would say it's, yes, my ideal customer profile is a large enterprise and solving their internal problems, because that's the people we're talking to are looking to solve internal problems using MCP and agents because it's safer than doing it with the outside public stuff. And so that's, making what you asked and said correct. That's where we're focusing. But with that said, I would say I pretty strongly believe in your definition, the layer that your definition adds, in that it's socio-technical. There's a accountability, responsibility, market aspect that once you put something out there, and productization, I think, is one of the best ways to capture that, but that doesn't capture it all. I think there's just a certain level of responsibility, and that can be different sizes and shapes depending on what you promise and what you put out there as a capability. It could be low level, lightweight, fun, or it could be serious industrial grade, government, nuclear facility. I don't know. It's just how you express that capability and that intent and belief or not. Like if you're kind of oblivious and are aware of that accountability and put something out there, there's still accountability and there's still things. So I think that socio-technical is something I strongly believe. How it's expressed, and that's kind of why I'm enjoying talking to everybody and getting everyone's opinion, because you have strong opinions. Bruno, Pedro, Christian Postia, Mike Amundsen, Kevin Swiber, James Higginbotham. There's a lot of strong opinions on what it is, and I would say I'm also very focused on it bridging high level strategic and tactical precision. And as much between. Like for me, that is a capability in its nature, in its modern nature. It's got to be that bridge builder. It's got to be that connector across engineering and product groups, and done in an elegant way. Now, exactly how and all of the devil in those details, I'm still learning week to week, with the month.
And it's like you were mentioning a couple of names there. Like also in your post, you were talking about those, like Mike Amundsen and Daniel Kotzelt and Christian Posta. And then you had a couple of other names also. Like we were just before we started recording, we were joking about it. It's kind of like Fight Club, but there's like Capability Club but the first rule is that you actually should be talking about capabilities instead of not talking about it. It really feels like capabilities are having a moment right now.
And each of those people you mentioned bring a different, Daniel Kokot is consulting and helping large enterprises work their way through this. Mike Amundsen's coming from I associate him with hypermedia, affordances, semantics, stories, kind of those dimensions. Christian is very network focused. And so as I talk to each of these people, like I find each of those layers and dimensions super valuable to learn from and understand what is a capability. And I would say the common theme is it's a simpler way of describing things. And this is why I like it is there's a lot of baggage with APIs. We did fairly good with API. I remember celebrating like 2013 when the New York Times used API in a title of an article. And I believe pretty strongly that normal people should understand that APIs exist, that they're behind things. They don't need to understand all the details and nuances that we do. But to have control over your career, your business, you need a certain amount of awareness. Now, with that said, I find it fascinating the word they use cloud, and then the use of the phrase artificial intelligence as far as a balance between abstraction and something people understand. And I think capability is a form of that. It's a nice, simple word. It's meaningful to everybody, most people. It can be relative and it can be dialed in. But I also think it's a safer one than cloud or AI. And it's kind of, in my opinion, why it's having its moment is in response to artificial intelligence, which can be anything to anyone and anywhere. And there's actually very little precision and it's non-deterministic, where a capability, I hope, is equal parts determinism and non-determinism and business alignment. And there's a little more precision and comfort and trust. And so I'm hoping the capability club can be that honest argument, debate, negotiation, and that brings that level of trust in the word, that it's not like the hype bros hyping up AI. People actually trust us.
I love that. The how many times I've told people, or I keep repeating, like, AI, it's not actually intelligence. It's a really sexy label that gets people on board. It's super powerful technology, but it's not really intelligence. And then this anthropomorphizing that we're doing is very dangerous. And I think, well, actually, maybe capabilities to some extent, is that anthropomorphizing?
I think so. It is. And I think that it's an important, dangerous point right now from a labor standpoint, which I think is another out relative to the AI debate. And so we should probably be thoughtful about it. I would say it's also dangerous from an education, and when you align it with skills. I think you devalue what, like, a higher education would bring. So I think there are labor and educational kind of training expertise danger that we can, by flattening it. But I think if we can be mindful of those things. But I would say, yeah, it shouldn't be about a person and what a person is capable of. I would say if we're going to avoid that danger, it should be about what a group of people, and you were throwing out other words, a cabal, and I back cohort, it's like, what are a club, I think, is a good, maybe a wrapper. We're not saying human, individual person capability. We're talking organizational entity, team, domain level, club level capabilities. And that's why I like Naftiko, we're going all in on the nautical. Naftiko means Navy. So it's like, what's a ship capable of, to a fleet, to there's different groupings depending on what you need to be capable of, from, taking a little rowboat or a canoe down the river, to ferrying cars across a channel, to freight container or oil container, across the ocean. So I think how you do that in groups, I think that's what we need to focus on with capabilities.
So we were talking about some of the thought leaders in the space, in the API space, that are all started talking about this, and that's but there's also startups, like Naftiko is one of them. I think that Yantic probably is all, I would also say, is in the same startup wave. So it feels like there's been a couple of these startup waves where new businesses get started because people get excited about some new potential that is there in the market, and it feels like this is one of those, right? And then there's different paradigms of how this could work that are being tested in the market and that are being seen. Yeah.
And it's in specs too. A2A protocol has a capabilities property. Right. MCP, I don't know if it's in the spec. I have to look again, but they use it as a wrapper in MCP, the model context protocol. My wife calls it model control in a negative way. So I always Freudian flip there, but. Yeah. So it's an interesting term, but these business level, specification level, word and phrasing, this is the front line. This is how things get, this is API design, but at that socio-technical level that you speak of, this is how we negotiate and fight this. And this is, I learned this in the Swagger to Open API, the RAML to the Postman collection. Like, this is how startups grab mind share. And, if you start speaking the Swaggers and start speaking the open APIs and the Postman collections or the Bruno collections, or now the A2As and MCPs and skills, like, if you use that vocabulary and it's baked into your software development lifecycle and your gateways and your portals and that's powerful. That's how power aggregates and controls. And if you're a vendor or a specification that is using that vocabulary, then you're part of that. You have a certain part of that power. I think that's what people don't realize about what these battles, these skirmishes that are going on is we're battling for the soul of your enterprise, your data, your domain.
And I would not say, I think of it more like, again, going back to Fight Club, I think of it more as sparring rather than fighting, because I think that it's in the interaction and the challenging each other and pushing forward the field that we are creating the new world and the new technology wave that is right upon us. It's like, basically, the way I see it is that the Capability Club is figuring out how the API landscape needs to change because of AI. And I think that it's the combination of what we're doing that is going to define actually what in the end the outcome is going to be, and then whatever then gets adopted. And probably there's going to be an amalgamation of different aspects that actually in the end gets us to the full functionality or capability of what we're doing. Yeah.
And I love your hopefulness, and I agree with this sentiment. I just too jaded. I believed in API Blueprint. I believe that API Blueprint was defining the future and doing everything you said. And then Oracle bought it, and Oracle deprecated it, and it's not anybody's future, but it's still there. It's still everywhere, and it actually resembles what with skills in the Markdown kind of renaissance we're in. Because if folks remember, API Blueprint was Markdown. So it was a very simple approach, and it's gone. It didn't become the future. And I can point to RAML and others, that have fallen. So yes, I agree with all that sentiment, but I think the devil's in the details of what a capability is. And when you got venture-backed startups, me being one of them, I'm not pointing fingers out there, that you have different outcomes and different futures and different incentives and alignments. And I think those need to be put on the table. And I would say FinOps, there's a lot of FinOps standards and specifications. I'm seeing PRDs, product requirement definitions, in spec-driven bundles alongside some of these specs. And so I'm seeing more of that business and product spec alignment that hopefully we'll put more of those details on the table so they just don't catch you and derail the future that you speak of. Yeah. I think that's why I see these as skirmishes, as battles, because I've been in enough of them now. I'm not a veteran. I got one leg and I'm on a crutch. I'm like, so yeah.
At least I think our perspectives, they're super complementary. Like or our businesses' perspectives are at least between the two of us. I think it's more of a gentle, fun sparring session because you're focusing on capabilities on the inside and we're focusing on capabilities on the outside. And I think those are two very complementary worlds. How exactly, what formats? Yeah, I'm currently not that much concerned about the exact format that this is taking. I'm more busy with, well, there's some format aspect, but I'm busy with two parts of this. So one is low token, high entropy formats like Markdown versus higher token but semantically meaningful markup, and doing much more like something that leans itself much better to a knowledge graph. Like the tension between those two forms of documentation, where Markdown is really great for just dealing with an AI that comes in that does not know what it's looking at, because it just gets a Markdown. It's the most minimal markup you could probably, or one of the most minimal markups that you could probably imagine, which makes it easier to put the focus on the language that's in the file or in the document, versus something like I was at the DITA conference a couple of weeks ago. And DITA is like a Darwin information type architecture, is an XML language for documentation that is super specific, highly meaningful markup, where they were talking about creating knowledge graphs with minimalistic content pieces that together create this, I call it a knowledge kernel, but that's my words, but like a knowledge kernel for your organization that you can use to reason through, like in a logical way. So like, because Markdown, like with LLMs, you can basically just do the token roulette thing. And it works. It's very powerful, and it can be very effective if you're in a field where there's no clear standard yet. But I think that if you have highly marked up language, then that might actually be more effective in avoiding hallucinations and things like that. So that is one area that I'm currently looking at. I don't know. Have maybe what's your take on that? I was thinking about talking about this, but
I mean, it very much describes, I think, that deterministic and non-deterministic line that I'm walking and encouraging customers to walk when it comes to spec-driven development, which a capability or an aggregate of capabilities can be a representation of that. And let me give the example is I can have an open API specification that, let's even back up further. I can have documentation for a company. Notion is a good one. Notion doesn't maintain an open API for them. So I have Notion documentation. I can give that to Claude and it'll generate an open API specification for me. And then I actually have a skill that will make sure that open API specification is as rich as possible, meaning it's got summaries and descriptions, and Claude's very good at doing that. But then I can validate that open API specification because I have a JSON schema for open API 3.1 and 3.2 that tells me, okay, this is compliant with this. I can also do it because I have a set of rules that will go through every property and with regex and many different things tell me how good the summaries and descriptions were for documentation. Does it have examples? Can I do sandboxes with it? And so operationally, I have a lot of ways I can certify that. And then because OpenAPI has authentication and security, I can also fire that up. I can generate a Bruno or a Postman collection, and I can actually make calls to each of those, which will then tell me, semantic, does this match? Does this validate? So I have an open API that's validated. And so then when I start going, okay, well, I have wider semantics, JSON LD for groups of APIs that tell me these are semantically, this is an events API. It actually manages events. And I have another semantic richness that I can apply. And so there's a lot of ways I can use non-determinism within that whole scaffolding, but it's enabled and stable because I have a lot of schemas, a lot of artifacts, and a lot of structure and vocabularies, and that allow me to express myself safely and within a domain. This isn't, I'm narrowing it to a specific domain that I'm working in, but then it'll change and I can dial it in for other domains. And that's what makes it possible. So having docs that's severely structured, I struggle with what are docs, in that point. Like docs mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but having that semantic structure and that deep, rich semantic meaning when it comes to your markup or when it comes to whatever, I think is powerful and essential.
So it's the age-old tension between unstructured and structured.
Yeah, it's the next generation of that. Yeah, agreed.
But are then capabilities a wrapper that combine unstructured and structured?
That's one dimension of it for sure. But I would also say it's got to bring in other context for that domain. And what's most efficient right now is a lot of that business context. So what does this cost? What is the pricing? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the customers? What are their expectations? What are their feedback loops? And if those customers are agents, what are their feedback loops? Can they complain in chat in Slack channel just like the humans can complain, or is there a forum? And so a lot of those business details need to be in there as well. And that's what's most deficient right now is, determinism and non-determinism, but that wider context semantics has to be engineering and business aligned.
And I think that is the other aspect that I see in this sparring sessions is the tension that I think we're pretty much agree on. So I think that the tension where it's not clear yet what the outcome is, how do we materialize this thing? I think the tension that we're kind of all agreeing on is that there's a necessity to bridge the semantic gap that is there between business and technical. and that if we don't bridge that gap, then that causes lots and lots of problems, because your AI goes and starts analyzing your marketing site, and it makes up all kinds of funny and interesting or wonderful things that your company probably can do, but then it's completely disjointed from when the AI goes to your developer portal site, and then there's a bunch of documentation that's saying other things, and a lot of those things that you thought you might be able to do are no longer there. There's a lot of new things that are there. Maybe they're even using different words. Maybe there's product names that don't make any sense whatsoever. So that gap, that semantic gap that is there, this is the part that we're focusing on, is just whatever the format in the end is going to be, just like getting ahead of the game and just making sure that our customers can start publishing the semantic glue that helps to close that gap, that bridge. So we're looking at capabilities more from a conceptual piece or a perspective, like this is a problem that needs to be fixed, whatever the format is that in the end ends up winning. Because if we don't do this, like your prospects, they're no longer doing research anymore. When people do a Google search, in the past, when you did Google searches, you would just use a couple of keywords and you would get some results. You would then go a little bit deeper, you do a lot of reading, and then you would learn about the domain language of the industry that you're trying to get a solution from. Now you just make one very long intent query with a lot of context, and whatever is hitting against that, there's a good chance you're just going to run with that. And that means that there's a fundamental this gap that was always there, that was always a problem, now has become life or death for your business. Because if you cannot close that gap, that means that your prospects don't know that you can solve their problem.
Yeah, and AI is just further isolating us and insulating us in this journey. And I agree that you guys are focused on these external problems, and I'm very much focused on these internal, but they're related. What you perform on the outside of your enterprise is very representative of what you're capable of internally or not, and what you're comfortable in. And we should keep working on the capability vocabulary for the capability club. Is like, what are the words, confidence, comfort is, and I've always said it of organizations I've worked with, is your portals, your developer portal is a representation of your company and internally. And like you said, I mean, for me, the honesty level is like, you go to a website and their marketing is the least honest that I can trust. I go to their developer portal, it's more honesty. But honestly, like the design of your API is the most honest representation that I can trust and get out of you, because it's the nuts and bolts of it. And depending on if you generated your docs or how your portal may or may not be a representation of that. But then you have organizations that have multiple portals. I know plenty of companies who have multiple public portals, and they have different purposes. And I know you have a kind of structural approach or vocabulary to describe that, but some of them are for different purposes, but some of them have different legacies and histories and reasons why. And that socio-technical that you speak of is, we did this for this partner in 2014 because the market effects were a certain way. And then we did our API portal because we bought Apogee in 2017. And then, so there's all these other details of why. But now I think all of that's kind of being exploded with, like what's happening with AI, or not exploded, but we have to reconcile it. Like you said, it's time to, otherwise we're going to be in a world where.
Well, because you've got like slightly different chunks of content that are being vectorized from all these different platforms, and they're all just a little bit different. and that's the worst thing you can give to an AI, because that's like a hallucination recipe.
It's like a little peyote mix that you go to. It's like,
this looks kind of the same, but let's throw it together. Let's see what it gives.
No, and that context engineering, that context window that you want to put forth as accurate in representing your company. And so what you're saying is that has a set of cycles to it, like that whatever we put out, we're going to have to deal with for X amount of time for whatever the cycle is.
Yeah, so the performance of AI or of the frontier models right now is a combination of a couple of different things, but the pieces that you can influence with your content are twofold. There's the model that is being trained on all the content that's out there, And then there's the index that is being used to like retrieve pieces of context that is then used to generate the answer. Now, the index gets updated all the time, but the model only gets updated every 6 to 18 months. So like right now, and this cycle is still quite fast and probably might slow down. Maybe there's going to be some fine-tuning and so on that will still happen on the models. But fundamentally, retraining is very, very expensive. So that's not something we're going to be doing every week. So whatever content you have out there today for your brand that is influencing what are the token sequences that are actually embedded in the model itself. So like if you're the market leader for a specific product or service, the best company for XYZ is this. That token sequence, that's basically frozen in time. The moment that the model gets trained, at least as far as I know, that does not change, which means that your chance to influence how the world will be thinking about you for the next 6 to like almost 2 years, like half a year to 2 years, has already closed. So where with SEO you were able to like almost have immediate changes, and there's still that index part that is where you have the chance to immediately change things. But the lowest token distance between your brand and your customer is in the model. And that there you only have like there you basically have a chance every half a year or every 2 years to influence it. There was even a company startup I read about that is going to produce chips that have large language models actually built into the chip, weights and all, which means that like for that lifetime of that chip, that is the model, whatever model got incorporated in that architecture, that is the model that is going to be using. So if you even if the market leader changes in those years that chip gets used, or maybe you're already the market leader, but you haven't properly documented it yet, and the world, and when the bots go scrape the internet, they can't deduct that, then you might be stuck without that position for the next 2 years. And that was a really interesting thing that I realized. So like making sure that your documentation, your public-facing documentation, because if you have documentation and it's not public and it's proprietary and you're putting it behind a login wall, and I know there's some cases where you do want to do that, but having some documentation out there publicly, at least partial documentation about what your capabilities are as an organization, is essential. Because if you don't do that, you will not be in the model. That's chance that the model itself immediately spits out your solution as the way forward, that is going to be out of it. And
that's the first kind of plausible claim or argument for putting more out there that I've heard, and that's compelling, because I've talking to a lot of people who are just super nervous about putting anything out there because of LLMs, and they have no control and they're giving away something. And I've always been a proponent of making your APIs public, because you still can choose who has access to them and what they can do, and it's a competitive advantage. But making that sell has always been so hard. I mean, I've had entire IT groups walk out of my talks and tell me I was an ass, because I made the suggestion that they should publish an open API menu of all of their APIs on a public portal. That's who does that, and I'm like, well, people who secure their APIs do that. But, and so, yes, you want to control that narrative. Like, people are afraid they're going to have less control by putting this out there. But no, this actually gives you more control over that narrative.
It's a very interesting dance, because at the same time, some of that data can be used against you. But like being able to at least declare what your capabilities are, I think will become essential, because you can no longer rely on people taking the time to get to know your markets and really like even having a conversation with your sales team. There's a good chance that people will just, ask their bots, and the bot said no, and yeah, probably is true, right? But yeah, and you lost an opportunity. So I think that's being able to publish documentation, at least partially publicly. And you can still have, you can have mixed content where there's a public piece and there's a private piece. But I think that is important going forward.
Yeah, and I had a Speakeasy, Daniel from Speakeasy, on my podcast. So it just went out yesterday, but it was recorded a few weeks ago. Talking about Speakeasies, they published their agent skills to a repo. And that it was such an elegant, they're an SDK generation tool. And it was such an elegant menu of what they offer. And I'm a big proponent of your API specs, your docs, your portal being this menu. I literally gave that argument to Google in the Oracle versus Google copyright case, and they pleaded it in 2014 at the appellate court that your APIs are, your menu, and it's like a restaurant menu. And so, and it doesn't matter that you put your menu out there. They can copy it, and they can have burgers, and they can have steaks, and they can have shakes, but your quality of where you source your meat, where is what matters, like what's behind that menu. And so what you're arguing is, whether it's markdown, HTML, markdown, open API, MCP, or skills, get it out there, get it and make it an accurate, precise representation, because this is your menu, your framework to control the narrative that's told about you.
Yeah,
I like that.
Sometimes I've heard use cases where there's certain capabilities you don't want to publish, like when you have a very powerful partner that can like force you to make an API just for them. You don't want to publish that, but generally there's this is nature of life, of symbiosis is openness, because if you're not open, you cannot go into interaction. You have to carefully do this balance between open and closed, and and intelligently opening. But some public announcement of who you are is essential, and we see this actually with viruses. When you have a cell, there are certain markers that actually are the ways that viruses get into cells. But still, we have those markers because they're essential in declaring, like, I'm a human cell, or I'm part of Christoph, like, and there is that tension that will never go away. And I think that's that tension we're going to see more and more in the API space. But yeah, the alternative is death. Like, isolation is death.
Yeah, and I think you're going to get different responses from different members of the capability club that you have this conversation with, and how product-oriented, network-oriented, like what is the influencing piece of this? For me, like, stories are the most important piece of all of this. It's not a technical, it's the stories that influence the socio-technical kind of currents and ripples and waves. And you can put a lot in that's not true. Back to what I was saying about the truth of your website, your docs, and your APIs. Like, you can put out betas and say, hey, here's a set of skills or MCP or API. And all your competition goes, look what they're doing. They're going there, and then you're never going to do anything with it. Like, there's ways you can plant seeds and mislead and direct and further control your narrative. And then there's a maturity level. Some of the skills and APIs I don't put out there for API evangelists. These are how I crawl for APIs, interpret APIs. It's definitely my secret sauce, proprietary. I don't put it out there, and I'm one of the most open. I believe the most. So that maturity of things, certain skills, certain resources, it just depends on your overall mastery, I think, of your domain or domains. And then how you craft that narrative. And the ones who are in control of that narrative and consistently control that, I think, are what's going to allow them to get ahead and be more competitive.
Yeah, exactly. Because, like, for customers to be able to find out that you have a solution for their problem, it needs to be out there much more than before. In the past, people might have done a deep dive and go into conversations with your sales team. Now that might not be happening anymore.
But what about if I'm insecure about our ability to iterate and move forward and fast? Like, now I just gave the competition, insight into what I'm doing. I think a lot of us have insecurities at that level.
The business model of an agency was, you come to me with your requirements, tell me whatever the crazy thing you want me to do. Like, I'm a technical expert, I know this technology, and I'll build it for you. And that model has, I think, for a big part, just died because agency is no longer something that's reserved to the technical experts. I think the big shift that's happened. So there's this, both on the agencies and SaaS companies both have to change massively. Agencies need to become consultancies that can help customers to achieve an outcome, So the value is no longer in the ability to execute. The value is in the ability to execute the right thing. And same with SaaS companies, the value is no longer in having a product. The value is in having the right product for the right customer. And those are massive paradigm shifts that the whole IT community is reckoning with right now, I think.
Well, and as they're trying to platformatize internally, I think too, and they've been standardizing a lot of this, but I'm curious, now thinking about this, how is platformification kind of the right path? What is the kind of AI response to this at engineering and the business level to finding that right tool for the right path, the right solution, but in an internal sense as well? So
there's I don't know if I've talked to you about this, the three economies from Jay Bloom. Have I ever talked to you about this?
No, doesn't ring a bell.
So Jay Bloom, he's a complexity philosopher, I'll say, but from the IT world. He published this framework, the three economies framework, which is about why platforms matter. And actually, in that framework, it has the answer, is that, what he describes is that there's three economies. There's an economy of differentiation, there's an economy of scale, and then there's an economy of scope. And the economy of differentiation, that is like building the exact thing for a customer like that they need in the moment. The economy of scale is like Kubernetes, like big infrastructure, and being able to operate it at like a cost, like good cost factor, like reducing the cost. The economy of scope is about creating reusable assets that become better from reuse. So, and this is also where open source software lives, where platforms live, in that they are creating the components that they're not scarce. They're like, scarcity is not a thing there because they become better from reuse. So more people use it, the better it becomes. And so that is why I think that platforms have a really important role but they're not economies of scale. They're not about making everybody use the same thing. They're economies of scope. They're about creating primitives that are composable and reusable, and that become better from reuse. And the more times the same component gets reused, the more valuable it becomes.
So if you're doing just one single central platform within the enterprise, it's probably not doing that well.
Well, if you have a platform that is, but the platform is not the site where you host the platform, or it's not the collection. It's not the thing itself. The platform is the assets that you're putting into the platform. It's all about what are those reusable pieces that then people are going to compose into the end results in the economy of differentiation that they're building.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the philosophy and approaches in how, back to Naftiko being a Navy, like, a Navy has many different ships, vessels, fleets, groups, and I need to learn all the terminology better, but for different purposes and different reasons. But then you have your admiralty, which is usually the government level, if you're talking Navy, military. But if you're a corporate fleet, it might have different. So I think those bounded contexts or domains that you need to platformatize and build those primitives, it is pretty important to have that context and know what you're working towards.
And I think actually capabilities are the ultimate economy of scope, because you're defining like a specific outcome that you're able to achieve. Capabilities are composable, and they don't really care all that much about how they're built on the inside. They care more about what is it that you can achieve with it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that you are working on that's third economy, the economy of scope. When you look at Jay Bloom's work, he talks about it, how that third economy, that economy of scope, is actually what makes it possible to unify an economy of differentiation with an economy of scale. That when you're trying to have a single team that's trying to do all three of these economies, it does not work. So like a team that is working on creating a differentiated product needs to function differently than a team that's working on scale, needs to be different than a team that's working on scope. So I think that what you're working on is creating a platform technology for an economy of scope inside of an organization.
Yeah, and I would say the back to the club analogy. And one of my goals is to bring together different disciplines, domain experts too, and find ways of, I don't want to say like shaping and influencing and learning from these economies and helping people understand those different scopes. So I'll look into his work. That's really interesting. I'm not familiar with it. So
I got to know him. Yeah, we had a series about complexity with Mark Bergauer. He's my complexity mentor. He introduced me to his work. Yeah, interesting stuff. Very applicable. Very close to also the API world. But yeah, I think this is the next iteration of economy of scope assets.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. Is there anything you still want to pitch, Ken? Something that you would like people to interact with or to go check out?
You can find me at API Evangelist, building at Naftiko.io. Those are really the two doorways right now. API Evangelist is more opinionated API, kind of the technology, business, and politics. Naftiko, if you're looking to embrace your legacy infrastructure, your APIs, your databases, your data, internal and external. But if you're looking to kind of translate that into what you need for the next, that's what that's what you'll find at Naftiko. Very straightforward business, large enterprises. I mean, anybody can use it, but we're really focused on large enterprises. That's where you should head. But I'm looking forward to this bringing together other people and me tuning into the podcast. So keep, for you and the podcast and then the guests who come, like, let's try to figure out the continuity of the club, to use the C word, is how do we keep building and iterating and feeding each other's worlds and invite each other to our different podcasts, cross-pollinate, share ideas, but then keep the difference and our expertise, evident as well. So I look forward to where this can go beyond just this conversation. So.
Yeah, and thank you very much for being there at the founding of the club and for being an inspiration. It's always great. Also, always fantastic to have conversations with you. Always learn so much, and for all your work you're doing in the community.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken. Until next time. Bye.
I'm leaving.
That's it for this episode. This episode of the Resilience Podcast was brought to you by Pronovix. You can learn more about our company at pronovix.com, and thank you for listening.